Thank you. I think one of the things that we think about here too is that when we're teaching kids about the census in particular, what we're really teaching them about is about civic engagement, right? Like it doesn't have to stop at statistics or a math game or a challenge. I mean, what we're really talking about is how do you participate in your community? And I think that is never too early of a lesson to help pass on as well, right? And I mean, I think a lot of us think about like participation in the census as kind of a low bar for civic engagement, but I think again, you know, it's a great first step when folks know that they can trust their information in that way. They're much more likely to become voters. They're much more likely to, you know, build up all the other levels of the pieces that we were talking about before. So, yay census, yay. I don't know. I don't know. Yay for democratic processes that still exist. So, well, hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for those of you who came back in this afternoon. My name is Molly. For those of you who I have not met yet, I work with an organization called Welcoming America. We heard a little bit about that this morning. I think one of the things that I will start off by saying is that this morning there was a ton of content that I was trying to share, and I hope that you all are ready now to utilize some of that content and some other expertises that you bring to the room and really talk a lot about how we can create and support welcoming and inclusive schools, but also thinking in terms of some of the discussion that we had this morning, and just using schools as sort of a model for how we can create welcoming and inclusive institutions in our community of all kinds. And so I think there's a couple of different ways to look at that piece. So one of the things that I wanted to really start off with. Hold on, let me get myself a little bit organized. This time is I was thinking let's do a quick round of introductions to each other, and so we can kind of jump off on a short little piece of dialogue. So again, I will start. My name is Molly Hillegas. I am the Midwestern Regional Manager for Welcoming America. I've had the great privilege to work with the folks here in Princeton and help support some of the welcoming work that's happening here, as well as with other communities across the country. I live in a small town called La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I, you know, this is the fun part of my job. The rest of it, I get to talk to people on the phone from a spare bedroom office with a fold-out desk. So I'm really happy to be here. I guess we can start with you guys here on the front row.
Who am I?
Who are you?
Ross Wishnick. I'm the chair of Princeton Union Services Commission. I'm the founder of Friends Under Backing Princeton. I'm very engaged. I did attend one of the Welcoming America's, what is it, Interactive? Is that what it's called? In Atlanta about 3 years ago, which was really interesting. The breakout sessions, very informative. And I don't normally like to go to these conferences, but I would say that it was really well worth it.
I did not pay him. The conference is in June in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay, there you go.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Cochran. I'm the superintendent of the Princeton Public Schools, and the title of this workshop is the most important work that we strive to do. So I'm grateful to be here and looking forward to learning.
Hi, my name is Debbie Braunfeld, and I'm a school board member on my second term.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tamara Torres. I am a bilingual case manager for LADEF.
Hi, I'm Beth Fraser. I'm a teacher at the Princeton High School.
Linda Oppenheim. I'm a member of a local anti-racism organization called Not in Our Town, Princeton.
Hello, my name is Angela Ciso Stentz, and I'm one of the assistant principals at Princeton High School.
Hi, I'm Gail Wilbur, and I am from Princeton Charter School. I'm in charge of the elementary division.
Hi, I'm Sue Kushner, and I'm from Princeton Charter. I'm the school counselor.
Hello, my name is Tara O'Shea. I'm the Director of Childcare for the YWCA and the After School Program at Community Park in Riverside.
Hello, I'm Trinidad Rodriguez. I am the Parent Education and Community Outreach Coordinator for Princeton Family YMCA and John Witherspoon Middle School.
Hi, I'm Jen Simon. I teach special education science at the middle school, and I run the Gender and Sexuality Club there.
Hi, my name is Kim Dorman. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library. I also serve on the Civil Rights Commission.
Hello, I'm Annie Kosick. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Princeton Public Schools.
Hi, I'm Ruby Musavi. I'm an ESL teacher at Johnson Park School.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Robinson Cohen, and I'm the superintendent and principal in Roosevelt Public Schools, which is Monmouth County. But I'm a longtime Princeton resident. My own children went through the school system here, and I've been involved in equity issues my whole life.
Hi, I'm I'm Shauna Lindsay. I'm head of the lower school and director of academics for Chapin School, and I'm also a parent of Princeton public students in JW and PHS, happily so.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rick Dugan. I'm the headmaster of Princeton Academy of the Sacred Heart. We're all boys kindergarten through grade 8 independent school here in Princeton. I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dee Harris. I'm also at Princeton Academy of the Sacred Heart. I'm a fourth grade teaching assistant, member of the DEI committee. I grew up in Princeton, proud graduate of Princeton High School, and happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Sherry Verdue. I'm the lower school learning specialist at Princeton Academy and the proud mother of a Guatemalan daughter.
Hi, I'm Wendy Smith, also from Princeton Academy of the Sacred Heart. I'm a second grade teaching assistant.
Hi, I'm Nathan Weaver, middle school English teacher at Princeton Academy.
Hi, I'm Tom Parker, graduate of the Princeton School System, put 6 children through the Princeton School System, chairman of the Princeton Civil Rights Commission.
I'll introduce myself. Melissa Sirius, Director of Princeton Human Services.
Dina Paulson McEwen, Executive Director of Latin American Legal Defense and Education Fund in Trenton.
All right. Well, thank you. I think one of the pieces here is that I think that there is a ton of wisdom in this room when we're talking about this topic. And so I think one of the first places that that we can start is by just having a very brief conversation with each other. So I'm going to ask you all to find another person that you're sitting very close with, and just answer the following question, and that really is, in your experience, what makes students and families from diverse backgrounds feel welcome at school? And I'm only going to give you 2 minutes, so like a couple bullet points here, folks. Oh, no. I was just going to tell people I was going to do a couple of report outs, but I thought I'd start in the back. All right, we'll take about 30 more seconds here, and then we'll come back together. All right, let's go ahead and bring it back to the full group. And I think it would be great if folks wanted to share just a couple of anecdotes that came out of their conversations. I figured we could start this time in the back. We don't have to give, like, not everyone has to share, but if there's anyone that would like to share something that sort of came up in their conversation, that would be great.
We were talking about the biggest thing is if you smile. When you don't have to know their language, but if you smile. For me personally and professionally in the child care center, when the parents come in and they have a child, I always lower myself down to the child and greet the child as well as the parent. Would you want to say anything?
That's great. Anybody else? Yes. Knowing someone's name and how to pronounce it correctly.
I think actually seeing somebody, literally but also figuratively, and it's maybe hard to put into words, but that spiritual presence that we sometimes feel with each other, seeing in the sense of acknowledging.
Anybody else? Okay.
The idea of bringing people together that are in the same regional space.
See, you guys are getting warmed up already.
We talked about celebrating different faith traditions from all the different diverse population we have.
Having representations of oneself already in the community, in whatever way, people, artifacts, acknowledgement.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Okay, thank you. I think that all of those pieces are really create kind of the depth and breadth of all of the things that we're talking about, right? Because it really does sort of run the gamut of those very tiny micro personalized interactions to the very end of the spectrum of what is our full philosophy of human condition and how do we relate that to each other. So I think we will be talking a lot about how all of those things come into play and really where we can find synergy in many of those things. As far as what we're going to be doing, I'm hoping that we can kind of understand some more of these elements of welcoming schools. We can consider some of the ways that might be really easy to incorporate new things into the work that we're already doing in our classrooms and in our school systems, and maybe a couple things that might be a little bit harder or more long-term down the road kinds of things. And I think, you know, the other piece that I want to add to this, and I think really sort of was bubbling up this morning for those of you that were here was I think we really want to have a little bit of time to talk about some of the personal experiences that we're having in our schools and in our other institutions, and brainstorm with each other as well as with other experts on, you know, what should we do in this particular situation? What are other communities doing in this situation? And where do we really go from there? So that's the other piece that I think we can spend some time on this afternoon. You know, I talked a little bit about Welcoming America this morning, so I will be super duper brief on that. But I think this might be a great opportunity to say that as an organization, Welcoming America works with nonprofits and community-based organizations, as well as with municipalities. And one of the things that I think that's really cool about working with a municipality like Princeton and some of the other places that we work with is that, you know, having the city on board and having the school district on board and having all of those folks in the room to have these kinds of conversations, I think can really jumpstart or kickstart other initiatives that are already happening. And so, I mean, I know that folks come to these kinds of conversations with all of the things that they want to do, but I also think it's important to take a moment to remember that, like, having the institutional backing and support of some of the large institutions in our communities is really an important aspect, and I think allows things to become much more institutionalized and much more quickly if you're employing both an inside and an outside strategy, shall we say, right? And so I think that's really wonderful. Ultimately, Welcoming America is really working to promote a different kind of narrative in our country and globally, one that says that folks from all backgrounds and all nationalities can really have the opportunity to participate civically, socially, and economically in their communities, and that our communities are more vibrant and wonderful because of that diversity. We were started about 10 years ago in Nashville. And Nashville is a community that had experienced a pretty significant and short in terms of time frame demographic change. And what really happened there was there was a lot of backlash, and that backlash really came to a head with a group of activists in the community who decided that they wanted to pass an English-only municipal resolution. And so they really wanted the city council to pass this resolution saying that English was the only language that should be spoken within city government and within other institutional places in their community. And ultimately, that resolution failed. But what our founder, who was the executive director of the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition at the time, really came to understand that while building power and supporting immigrant families and immigrant communities is critically important, and I think what we're seeing right now within our political situation is that is still critically important, and putting money and resources and support to the crisis at the border and to our newly arriving families is incredibly important, but that there's also this other piece about playing the long game. And that when we are thinking about proactive policies and meeting people where they are, and as my friend in North Dakota told me the other day, what we're really trying to do is get all the naysayers in the pot and turn up the heat very slowly so they don't realize it. And that's the kind of proactive pieces that we're talking about, right? I guess probably East Coast, you guys would say lobsters, right? He said frogs, but you know. I don't know, but I think that's the rub, right? That's the rub for all of us in serving the kids that we work with every day, thinking systemically about the issues of inequity that we're facing, as well as how do we build support within the community that might be more ambivalent about our issues. So I think we talked a little bit more before about some of those tactics and moving folks across the spectrum. Again, you know, there's a piece here that I don't want to, that I don't want to just skip over for those folks who weren't there, that really when we're talking about a lot of this work, we're talking about sort of three components of convergence that create social change, and that can move from individual activation to community activation when we're talking about issues of welcoming and issues of inequity and tackling issues of racism and all of those isms that we are constantly bombarded by. One of them is leadership, and I think, you know, you all here are in a really, really great space. Where's my friend from Bloomington Normal? Over there, Bloomington. Bloomington, for instance, is a community that really had some very contentious conversations and a real sort of outpouring of activism from the right and the left when it came to passing a very simple welcoming resolution for their community. And so we know that this kind of stuff can get really contentious. And the leadership there, the mayor, as well as some members of the city council, they didn't know how to handle what was happening at all. They hadn't had conversations about what happens if this gets contentious. What do we really mean when we're saying welcoming? How do we support everyone in our community in a way that's meaningful? And it really turned out very poorly for them. And so having leadership that has sort of thought about some of those pieces and is really thinking about how do we institutionalize and embed this kind of work is really key. The other one that we talked about too, I think, before around contact building, and actually Ross was giving me a few pieces here, and we were talking about like what are the components of contact building, and what kinds of activities would work really well here in Princeton. So I don't know if any of you guys, others of you have been thinking about that since this morning either, but when we talked about that earlier, the pieces were really how do we put folks in a space where there's a level playing field, where it's not one community serving another community? What is a great shared goal that we can come up with, and how do we fit it into the time and the constraints that many of the folks in our communities already have, right? Like those are the three big tricky pieces, I think, that when it comes to that. So if any of y'all have a great idea and you want to share it, now or later would be fine, but something to think about. And then finally, there's the piece around how are we communicating the values that we share as a community? How are we communicating the values that immigrants bring to our community and that our long-term residents bring to our community to make it the vibrant place that it is? Why talk about schools, right? There's lots of institutions in our communities. There's city government, there's universities, there's libraries. But one of the things that we've noticed throughout our work over the past 10 years is that thinking about schools and their ability to welcome new families is an absolutely critical piece of this puzzle. And I think one of those reasons really is that when a family comes to a community, the school is really one of the first institutions that folks have the opportunity to interact with. I don't think I'm clearly preaching to the choir on this, but I do think that it is that there takes some intentionality in how we approach that, and what kinds of opportunities our families can get connected to within the school sphere. I think, you know, one of the other pieces here is that you know, arriving arriving in a new country is a really overwhelming experience. And I think we were talking a little bit about this offline too, but just because it's so hard to get here right now for many families, you know, we're not just talking about language barriers or other kinds of pieces. Many of our families have really experienced a lot of trauma before they get here. You know, whether they have spent a long time in a refugee camp, they might have been separated from other members of their family due to travel bans, or they've had this really harrowing experience of trying to cross the southern border. And I think all of those things create a really different reality for all of the new folks that are coming to our communities. And I think that presents a very unique challenge to our time, while there's always going to be the challenge of incorporating folks with language barriers and other pieces, cultural differences, but there are a few of those pieces around trauma, and that I think, you know, it would not behoove us to forget at this moment, and I think it's really important. And you know, really ensuring that folks' experience right off the bat. I mean, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, right? Like, you know, and I think we all know that when we've gone into an institution or a place and had a bad experience on the first go, like that takes its toll on us. And I think, you know, interacting with institutions can be hard, even when we feel very confident and we know the language. And so, you know, I think, again, I think I'm preaching to the choir on this, but I do think it's a really important space for us just to kind of sit with and recognize, like, the power and the opportunity and the challenge there. I think, you know, and I would say just recognizing the challenge here and the opportunity is really okay. And I want to, you know, obviously too, you know, validate all of the educators and the administrators in this room to say that, like, this work is really hard. Like, you know, like, there are great sort of models around education and our educational philosophies and programming around integrating newcomers and all of those kinds of things. But we have not seen that scale on a national level at all. Like, it's hardly even scaled on a school district level, right? Like, there are a few schools doing this over here, or a couple of great programs that do this over here in this community, but there aren't a lot of, like, national models of how to do this work. And so one of the things, so for lots of school districts and lots of teachers, it really does feel like they're swimming upstream in a place where there's a lot of things already coming at them. We all know that students from all backgrounds are coming to school with a lot more, carrying more baggage than they ever have before, and with complex social needs and all of those kinds of pieces. So again, kind of fitting this into all of that model too is a really, you know, can feel really daunting. And so I think one of the pieces there is just remembering a couple of the examples that you all started out with, right? Like, what can you do? You can get down on someone's level. You can smile. You can really try to get their name right as best as you can, and you can just take a little bit of extra time and in doing that. The next couple slides really are sort of like the case making piece here, and so I feel like you guys, like, all in this together, and you wouldn't be in this room if you didn't think that creating welcoming and inclusive schools was a really important thing to do. And so maybe in just thinking about this, and in the communications training we talked about before, here are just some tips and tricks for you all to be able to get some more support, maybe from other folks in your schools, maybe a couple of the naysayers you might find, you know, parents who might feel like there's something happening that they're not as comfortable with. And so, you know, I think for our students, why we want to build welcoming schools is really that, you know, we want them to feel safe. We want them to feel that they are taken care of, that their health is important, that their well-being is important, that they are seen as real people with value, and that they have the opportunity to contribute in our school system. You know, we know that when folks feel welcomed, they can do better academically. That's a well-researched part of this, and having, you know, state benchmarks and all of those kinds of things that we know that we're up against is also something to be considered in this space, and that's just the reality of where we live. We talked a lot, I think this morning too, about this concept around integration, and I think I've had several of offline conversations with many of you today about what that integration really looks like, and can kids who you know, share the double burden of being the first generation of folks to achieve academically in their communities, go on to achieve their dreams, and by extension sometimes their parents' dreams, and can they sort of move into what we would consider to be well-integrated members of our communities, and how do we support folks in doing that, but also celebrating the rich cultural heritage with which they also come and bring to the table, right? And then, you know, there's also another piece that we were talking about in depth this morning too, about creating those connections between groups in our schools, and you know, and this one, despite all policies and procedures and I don't know, and efforts by teachers and institutions, I think that we do still live in a society where, you know, kids of a certain ethnicity sit together at lunch, or kids from this neighborhood sit together at lunch, or this happens over here, or these folks are doing this, and, you know, moving beyond that polarization is something that is really tricky, but by implementing some of these programs and policies, I think on like the elementary level, we can hope to mitigate some of that lack of intercultural communication and connection as kids get a little bit older. You know, for the community, it makes sense when kids do well in their schools, and I don't think I need to go through all this too much. But why is it good? Why is it good for the school? Well, there's lots and lots of reasons, you know, and but I think, you know, we really want to increase outcomes. We want to do all of those kinds of things. You know, for our community, having a welcoming school really makes it so that we can have better educated residents, we can have a more prepared workforce, and then we get into this piece about creating greater sociocultural, greater social cohesion. We talked about social cohesion this morning. And I think for us at Welcoming America and thinking about social cohesion, I think the real main takeaway here that I think about is that we're not hoping for I've lost the word that I need, but everyone's the same. It's not hegemony. Homogeneity, right? Yeah. Right. Rolls off the tongue at 4 o'clock, right? But we are hoping for the opportunity to recognize that we are all interconnected and that we really do need each other. Welcoming America is actually working with some other organizations throughout the country on an ad council campaign, and one of the things that they're trying to test out here is what kinds of messages around being really connected resonates. And so in one scenario that they were sort of throwing out to people, it was a teacher and a nurse, and they were both taking care of each other's kids, and one was an immigrant and one is not. And so that's the sort of like we're all in this together kind of piece that we're really thinking about here, not necessarily the same kind of nostalgia that we discussed this morning. So I will pause right there. Does anybody have comments or questions at the moment? Yeah. Oh, always the best when the question starts out like that.
But about 6 months ago, a group came from Los Angeles, organization that deals with substance abuse called Beit Teshuvah. That's the name of the organization. Okay. And they brought together, while it's a Jewish-based organization, it has nothing, and that's just what they're based, but people from all backgrounds who have had substance abuse, alcoholism, drug, they are a traveling group that puts on a play. Okay. And the play has to do with each one of there's several different situations, and they act it out and in various ways. And in one case, this black woman from Brooklyn who was out there, her family had basically disowned her and talked about her pain and how she's come full circle. And in the audience were her parents from Brooklyn. And, that wasn't a surprise to her, but it was the fact that they had gone through a whole big cycle and a reunion. My thought is there some lesson that might be interesting to employ here or elsewhere, where the community, let's say the schools, get together and they bring people of diverse backgrounds and they develop scenarios and plays and talk about the hurt that is encountered, and have the hurt be received by both sides of the transaction in different plays, and how people, when it's your side, you're feeling really terrible when you're the victim, and you say, well, I'm not the victim, or when you're the perpetrator, you say, oh, well, but when it's turned around.
Right.
Anyway, thought is maybe there is some lessons to be learned, or maybe that's a way to proceed.
Yeah. I've seen are any of you guys familiar with the People's Institute? They are a racial justice and training organization, and they do some really hardcore scenarios like that in some of the training modules that they do around racial inequity and those kinds of those pieces. I've never seen that done. I'm trying to think with kids. It absolutely could be. Oh, yeah.
Led by an 8th grader and the friends that she gathered together. To their peers, they did scenarios, then turned to the audience and asked them what their reactions were. Then they redid the scenario in a way that showed how the problem could be resolved. It was done at such a sophisticated level. It was really quite remarkable.
Were all the scenarios related to race?
I think so, but I don't remember exactly. Yeah. Could have been other issues.
Right. Yeah, I think, oh, no, I was just going to, go ahead. I think that I think you make a great point there that we should not, we have a lot to learn from our young people, and so we shouldn't assume that, you know, we have the most sophisticated methods for helping anyone get over their biases, right?
Just insofar as the schools can be such like an obvious place of where a lot of this welcome work can happen. I wanted to mention that one of the schools that LALDEF is doing work in, one thing that I have learned through our bilingual case manager who's there is that so that idea that schools can be that type of place, that only works insofar as educators are on board. So what we have found out from this particular school, as you know, our staff member eloquently has said, you know, half are really interested in these issues, but the other half, you know, just want their paycheck, right? So that's a real challenge.
I think as champions for work around diversity and inclusion, you know, we could probably just take, honestly, the next hour and a half and have a little bit of group therapy around what it means to do that. And I think that's necessary, honestly, right? Like I think we really need to be able to say, you know what, this doesn't work if other people aren't on board. This doesn't work if there's a lack of leadership. It sometimes also doesn't work for a myriad of other reasons. I live in the state of Wisconsin right now. A couple of years ago, we had this governor you may have heard of. And he did a lot to dismantle the unions in Wisconsin, and that had the true chilling effect of making most of the educators in the state feel incredibly undervalued. And so when you try to have conversations now about diversity, equity, welcoming, changing policies, like folks are really fed up and they really feel very, very undervalued. And so how do you approach these topics in a way that doesn't make folks also really defensive about, like, seriously, I work really hard, right? And I think, and so I do think that piece is really half the battle. And what we are seeing too, and I think I said this before, that, like, you know, a lot of our most diverse schools have they have kids and families that are experiencing a range of issues that they need support around, and how not, and I'm not one to say necessarily that, like, you have to prioritize a very, like, sometimes there are, like, these needs that really have to be prioritized, but that if we really are hoping to look at things from an abundance level, that maybe there's a way that we can incorporate it all. But, you know, there's advocates that work tirelessly every day to build the support in communities, and I think that they deserve a ton of credit here. And there's parents, and there's educators, and there's lots and lots of folks doing this work. And so my guess, I hope in there that you might find a couple of tools within this space that can kind of bring folks along, and I don't know, bring them over to your side, or help them see that you're not attacking them for the things that they're already trying to do, but that, you know, when we all do better, we all do better, and that we can really kind of go from that frame. Because I think that's really the best place for us to be, education is a hard system. It's a hard job, and I do personally really do think that most educators are completely undervalued in our society. So, teachers, administrators, thank you. I have a second grader and a 4-year-old, and I rely heavily on the other adults in the world to help shape them and help them be the best people that they can be. And so, as a mom and as someone who does a lot of advocacy, I really couldn't be more appreciative of all the things that you all do. Thought we'd take a few minutes here to just delve just a little more deeply into what some of the operationalized components of what some schools are doing when we're talking about building a welcoming space. The first part is really about student engagement, and I think this is a really great sort of starting point for schools that may not be sort of at the level of understanding things from a fully systematic way, or from a space where there might not be as much support within the superintendent's office or within the school board or other places, but that there are some opportunities for folks to still work within kind of their microcosm of work and change the experience of kids on the daily, really. This list obviously is not comprehensive, but I think it gives you a little bit of a sense of what are some of the strategies that I think we are seeing deployed across the school, across schools. And much of this, I'm sure, is already happening here. It sounds like there's some pretty great clubs and after school activities. One of the things that we have seen work really well in a couple of the communities that I work with, and Dayton, Ohio actually is a really great example of this. Is they have this one particular school called Belmont, and it is it's one of the most diverse schools in that particular county, or that particular part of the community. And they started a club that was all about it's called Welcome Belmont, and they really grabbed kids from lots of different sort of demographic spaces in the community, and they got some funding to really explore the town together. And they did this in a really historical context. So they talked a lot about issues of race and racism that happened in Central Ohio, and then they also talked about the Wright brothers, who were kind of central to that part of Dayton. And they did all of this in the summertime before school actually started. So when the kids who had been part of this program, and I think they met twice a week for a couple of hours in the summertime. And then those kids already had those relationships with each other, and they really found that it did break down some of those barriers on the high school level of saying okay, I sit with these people over here, I do this over here. Yeah. Yeah.
Examples of things that you're doing.
Yeah, that would be great.
I'd love to hear it. I mean, we have.
Yeah.
Just some quick thoughts in terms of welcoming community. Some things that are really basic, but I shake every boy's hand every morning as he comes in the door. And my head of lower school shakes every lower school boy's hand every day, 5 days a week. We have a faculty and staff group around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they work both internally, programmatically, curricularly, but also bring in shares. Some members of that are here today. On the student level, depending on the grade level, we'll have very intentional conversations around, we say the 5 C's of awareness: color, class, culture, context, character. We've taken time to build community norms for conversation. We allow the students to build them for themselves. Yeah, so these are principles. Then our boys graduate from us in 8th grade and go off to either public or private school in town, but about a third of them are going to go to boarding school somewhere else too and live residentially in diverse international communities. So that competency of communication is huge. Those are just some quick thoughts that come to my mind.
Thank you. I can speak for Johnson Park School. We have a international night that's hosted every year, usually in the month of December. It's before the break. And then here in my own ESL classroom at Johnson Park School, I host Our World Flags. It's an evening of celebration where families come from around the world. Throughout the whole school year, I also try to diversify the classroom in welcoming students' culture, heritage, background. Parents come in, they read stories. It's constant throughout the whole school year. Mm-hmm.
You were voluntold.
Hello. So right now we're working on the cultural festival that it's going to be most likely May 28th. This is my first year at John Witherspoon Middle School, but we do have a team and we're going to start working on more of our ideas to bring many cultures on that day. We also have Latinos en Progreso, which is for the male youth that meet during lunchtime. They can talk about anything that's on their mind. We also have an Infinity Club, right? It's called Infinity Club, right? There's an Infinity Club that we have. It's a club that is after school. And that's all I can think of right now.
Anyone on this side of the room?
I'm on the opposite side of town from Johnson Park at Riverside, and we do a lot of the similar things there. We have an international night. We have, right before school starts, we have a new parent and new family orientation where all the children come together and meet each other, and the parents also have an opportunity to network. And as a librarian, I try very, very hard to make sure that I have literature that mirrors what my students' heritages are.
One of the things that we do is after our lottery, we invite the parents to the school in the prior school year to entry, where they get a chance to meet each other. They exchange contact information. We provide listings of contact information. The grade that they will be going into, the current students write each incoming student a letter and tell them about our school and what they will enjoy in the school and what they can hope to find. We have orientation sessions in the summer for all of our incoming students so that they can get to know the school, they tour the school, they hear the procedures so that they're comfortable with that. We provide a student parent handbook. I'm going to let our guidance counselor talk about some of the activities, but I'll say on a bigger level, we start our school year with a family picnic. The parent organization works really hard to reach out to all of the families in a grade level. They also have, this was unusual for me coming to this particular school that I'm at, Princeton Charter. The room parents then have social gatherings with the parents of the children who are in school, and that again continues to foster relationships. And one of the things they do is they will have one during the day, they'll have one in the evening where both parents can attend. And then we try to offer ourselves as administrators, as the school guidance counselor. We contact these parents by phone, and it's not just a particular target group. It's everyone to find out how things are going, and a very open door policy so that folks are comfortable coming to us with questions and with issues. So those are some of the things we're doing. I do want to say that we're definitely interested in creating a more diverse population at the school. We've worked really, really incredibly hard on that. I'm going to say in the past 5 years, we are beginning to be more diverse, and we are also working hard. We have a professional development day tomorrow to actually work on understanding issues of discrimination. What are we not aware of that we might be doing? And how can we become more open and welcoming? So some of the things we're doing. Sue?
Okay, yeah, that was a big list, and we do make a big effort in terms of training staff and giving all students and parents a voice, because I think that's really important, is just that people know that their voice matters and that, everyone is important in the school. And just on a fun note is the Chinese New Year celebration has been a really, really successful event. And it's organized by our parents, and I think it's a nice thing to have the students and the parents organize things like that, so it's their voice.
We can speak a little bit about some of the things that happen at the high school level, especially for new students. So one thing that we do in particular that I love watching is that students who are really unfamiliar with schools in the United States, we partner them with other students, and it's really important for students who don't speak English at all, because we sort of just create schedules and expect some students to understand our system, and they do not. So it's really nice for them to have a few current students who can sort of walk through the day with them. We are particularly intentional about making sure they share classes together so that they can sort of be their buddies as they get sort of assimilated for the first few weeks. So that's really, really important to us. Our ninth graders all participate in a peer group program. So when we assign our new students, again, who have maybe some language barriers, we make sure that the seniors who are leading those sessions can also speak that language. This way, again, our students can have an idea of the activities and have fun as well. So that, I think, has really made some tremendous progress for our new students. Again, there's many people in our building with different groups like Generation 1 and the Get It Done group that reach out to parents also. But there's just so much that we do. Every Friday, Saturday night at the high school, there's something going on. Most of the time, it's a student-led activity. And so that's also really great to see our new students jump in and participate, and we kind of push them along. So I could keep talking, but I'm going to pass it on.
Or maybe. I think one of the things that you mentioned that was really great is creating those like family groups with the older and younger students. That is an opportunity for everyone to engage. So.
First of all, this has been very helpful. Kim, thank you for asking for the sharing. So I've been taking notes. We have a goal in the Princeton Public Schools of knowing every child, and we strive hard to do that. We've focused a lot of our professional development on what it means to be a culturally responsive educator, looking at our own biases, looking carefully at our students, and really focusing on listening to our kids has been a real emphasis in the past year especially, and we've had opportunities for our students to tell us their stories, either through panel discussions, through videos, through the kind of thing that Linda mentioned where they're putting on performances, or even through the surveys. We've tried to build our internal capacity at each school to respond to issues of equity, and so we now have equity teams of teachers and educators at each building. who go through training on a regular basis, and they're a resource to colleagues. We have an equity committee of the board that has focused very much on just listening in this first year. It was a newly formed committee, and so have listened to different segments of our very diverse community to get a sense of what the issues are. And that's been a powerful experience for us. I know some specific things that we do at the high school. We have a welcome center. We have students who come to us with major gaps in their formal education from Mexico, from Guatemala. We have a welcome center where we sort of meet them where they are academically, and we also recognize that they have experienced considerable trauma in many cases. We have bilingual counselors who we bring in to work with those students. So we are, and we're always striving to learn more, to listen more, and to provide what we can.
Thank you.
So I think I mentioned this earlier today. My school where I'm at is very new. They're transitioning very new into having a lot of new students coming in from different countries in our school, in the school where I'm at. So one of the things that I did because of language barrier and the segregation, it was like just forming by itself, was I created a cultural diversity club where the students, I got students that are, that don't speak English, students that speak English, students that are from Haiti that speak only French. And yeah, it's complicated, but somehow I got all these middle grade students, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to sit together and come up with events for the school, as far as bringing in speakers in to talk about diversity and culture. And they sort of lead it, and I help translate and involve in it, but they kind of created their own voice and, it's not forcing because I don't want to use that word, but they're like making the students get to know each other, making the teachers, empowering the school. So that's been really interesting and fun. And I want to just thank all of you for all the stuff that you're doing because I'm writing it down because I'm going to take this to them. So they'll be able to do things like the welcoming center and stuff like that and think about stuff like that, or involving Paris to come in. So I'm just jotting away, and I just wanted to give it a thank you. And I know that this group will also want me to say thank you as well.
So Chapin School is a pre-K through 8 school. It's a smaller school, and 60% of our students identify as students of color. So having conversations around what it means to have white privilege and to be in an independent school where privilege is definitely a part of the conversation is important. So a couple of things that we've been doing that have had some great resonance, not just in the classroom, which we do many of the things that have been mentioned, but is around how do we extend our classroom and have reinforcing conversations with our parents. So to look at one end, having multiple nights of parent curriculum evenings that are presented in the other person's first language. So Mandarin being presented, Spanish being presented, and the administrators are the ones who we're trying really hard to communicate. But it's fascinating when you have an affinity group brought together to learn about the curriculum. So that's been something that has really helped that parent body become more engaged, which then is supportive of what we're doing in the school community. But the other piece is to have lots of curriculum conversations, parent coffees, and unpack and do some school reads around privilege and equity and inclusion. And then the other piece that has been really powerful is having older students. We have the benefit of having 8th graders come and talk to our little ones and our lower school, our 3rd and 4th grade, around equity and inclusion and having empathetic conversations, which is connected to what you were saying earlier. How do we think about changing our behavior and understanding that this is important? It starts with empathy and understanding others' perspectives. So trying to cross across multiple constituencies has been really valuable.
Well, that was also, oh, no. going to move to parent engagement in a minute. So I think.
Okay, at the high school, I just wanted to mention that there is an elective that's a racial literacy course, full semester course. It's been offered, I think it's into its fourth semester. It's team taught by an African American teacher and a white teacher. And that's, there's talk about how to introduce elements of racial literacy throughout the curriculum.
Wow. Yeah. That's, I mean, that's really amazing. Yeah.
I just wanted to give a shout out to two girls, one whose brother is still at Princeton Charter, but they're two girls and they graduated from Princeton High School and they took a gap year from there until college, and they traveled the country and interviewed people from all different races and ethnicities, and it's called Tell Me Who You Are. And it's just like they took the action and they created this book, and it's a beautiful book, and it just shares all different stories and how people have been affected. Like, what lens are they coming from? How has their experience been shaped by their gender, race, ethnicity, and how it's impacted them as a citizen of America, which we think of as like, okay, this is all equality, and this sort of shows that no, people have very different experiences.
Yes, sir. Here you go.
I'm just going to pick on the school again, and Steve's modesty, but they've done a great job this season. They last year they had an equity report done, and they've done a great job of reaching out to the community. And this is what this is about: a constant dialogue involving all the stakeholders, the students, and being over the Civil Rights Commission. The students came down and expressed their concerns, about what their experience was like in the school, and I got to say the leadership took it to heart. We have worked on several initiatives, study circles to get folks talking about various issues and moving things forward. So I got to commend the process. Taken seriously of trying to make this thing work, going beyond like the Welcome Center and things like that, but part of the everyday experience, and it really is about dialoguing with the community to keep everybody intact. Thank you for that.
I think that's a really great point, and I know it's one that comes up in racial justice work a ton, but sometimes gets left out of the newcomer pieces. Like, oh, the goal is integration, and then we can stop. Right, but when we're thinking about other equity work and all of those kinds of things, like there isn't some like end goal, right? Like, and I think that's what keeps what makes the work always evolving and ever changing and exceptionally difficult on a lot of levels. Is that like, okay, we need to always keep having these conversations. We need to always keep thinking about what are the components that kids and families are bringing to their communities, and how do we support them, and how do we continue to challenge our privilege and have conversations about that, and continue to learn our history about the systemic inequities and the lines of racism that impact all of our day-to-day lives still. So I think you guys are awesome. All right. I think we could probably move fairly quickly around this piece, but because I think all of you all know this, but sometimes when we're talking in other spaces, there's a tendency within circles to be like, oh, we have an ESL teacher, or oh, we have this person to do this work. But I think all of the examples that you all just shared really demonstrated that you're sort of well past that piece, and knowing that it's really critically important, not just for for students to be supported, but also for you as educators and administrators to be supported and to have opportunities for professional development, to think and places where you can talk about issues of systemic inequity and privilege and cultural relativism and all of the things that we're talking about being literate in and having some knowledge of and basis of in order to be better educators, better advocates, and create better communities for our students. And so I don't know if anybody has like a particular, resource that they really like, or something that they think, like, wow, personally this has really helped me, that they want to share in that regard, because I do think that I know, at least I know that the teachers that I know are always doing things on their own to like become better teachers and to learn and like it's a constant growth mindset, and so having a collection of resources that is accessible and trusted, I think is really important. And so I don't know if you all have some spaces there, or you think of things that you want to share. I'd just say, maybe we can create a little list for folks. Maybe Melissa will send out a little list, or just an email where everyone can respond.
If I had to pick one resource, it would be Teaching Tolerance's website. And that, in addition to that, children's literature right now is at a stage where there is a boom of diverse literature, which provides different perspectives for both children and adults. So those would be the two places I would go to.
No, my children's librarian is the best person I know when it comes to how to talk to my kids and probably some other adults too. But
the National Association of Independent Schools, which is our governing body or association, has a People of Color conference every year, and it rotates its location. This year there were over 7,000 participants and growing, and members of my team have attended as well. But the website, NAIS, has a full battery too of resources around DEI work and community building also.
And I think so. The family engagement component here, I think, is another place where I've heard some like super great examples in this room, and I know that there are lots of other great examples across the country. Family liaisons, cultural liaisons, I think play this role in many cases. I think we've already talked about bilingual curriculum meetings, or meetings for parents in their first and native language. Lots of other ways. One programmatic model, if you're really looking and thinking about ways to engage parents, and think about some of the pieces around social isolation that sometimes, especially newcomer moms feel in their communities, is a program that is started by the Logan Neighborhood Center in Chicago. And this is a program that takes newcomer moms and helps and supports them with their own language development by bringing them into schools as peers, or as like teachers' aides actually in the classroom, and then they're reading books and communicating with kids who speak the language that they speak, and through the Logan Neighborhood Center, they're able to provide these moms, and it mostly is women, but I'm sure there's probably a couple dads too, but they're able to provide them some stipends for the work that they do, and they spend about, I think it's 6 hours a week in the schools, be it working in the classroom, and not only supporting the kids, the English language learner children in those classrooms, but then they're also really like building some of their own skills, and then it's really worked from this kind of community organizing model too, where all of the staff are the former parent mentors, and they have really sort of taken on the professional development of their peers as well. And they are doing, right now they're doing lots of census work. They've done lots of like know your rights trainings, and they've done all of this kind of stuff as a way to sort of fan out all of the resources of the school and the community together. And it's like, it's just a really cool model that I think folks have really kind of joined in on. And I think there's lots of, but again, what works in one community may not always be the right fit in another community. So depending on the population of folks you're serving and all of that. So I don't know if folks have some other kinds of family engagement strategies. I think we've heard a few really great ones. Another piece that I think I've seen in St. Louis, for instance, is that the International Institute in St. Louis is a community-based organization, but it also has a classroom type of space, and they are the folks who do all of the ESL or ESOL classes for adults in their community, and so they're not hindered by irregular school hours, and they're able to create some English language classes that are very specifically related to employment and communicating in a workforce space. So there's some other cool things to incorporate there as well.
I'm interested in how to engage families from the dominant culture, similar to what we heard is done at Chapin, because it's a very different kind of approach, which I think is needed. It's how to interest people who, for no other reason, would be interested in other children with problems. They may be willing to give food or do drives, but the actual proximity, the real contact, interest in doing that doesn't seem to be there.
Anybody got the magic bullet here? I agree with you, and I think one of the things that I see in my community and in communities that I work in this space, as well as just as a parent, is that community or family engagement is really hard. It's really hard with all, there's what we consider to be the PTO set or the PTA set of folks. And especially if you are in a school, like you said, where there is some income differentiation, or, a specific population of folks has more needs than another, then how do you really deeply engage families from both of those sectors without creating that same kind of like dynamic, and I have seen that work best honestly at my sister's kids' school in Colorado, and they have really tried to do a really great job of getting both the English-speaking families and the Spanish-speaking families to come to events, and like they do stuff like food trucks and games, and then they try to throw in like a little bit of like curriculum development and those kinds of things. But again, getting kids excited about being part of their school community and creating events that kids don't want to miss, I think is in some ways the best way to make that happen. And I think, you know, the folks from the high school probably have the edge there, but again, parents might not be coming as much. You know, this is like the crux of the contact building piece, right? Like, we all are feeling this level of isolation. We all are living in these spaces where we feel like we're siloed, but we're also saying, like, wow, I'm really busy, I'm not sure if I can go to that. Or, you know what, I just don't have it in me to, like, put myself out there and do this hard thing today. And I think that for us who are living in that dominant culture, like, that's a real sort of point of reckoning for ourselves, and from a school perspective, I think that is a very challenging place to be. I think it also provides some opportunities. I think there is a set of parents who are obviously, like, very invested in their children's education, and so they'll come to everything and anything, but again, do they find that they are able and willing to approach diversity in a way that is less, I don't know, less easy for them to palate in some way, right? And I think that's one of the greatest challenges of our work.
I really appreciate the question.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer per se, but just a couple of thoughts came to mind, and I'm also appreciating what Chapin's doing in this space. The one is engaging the dominant culture. My mind goes back to the students. When you first said that, I thought of the adults, and I thought of parents. But then when I thought about it further, I thought of the students. And so the work that we're talking about and again in our space, K-8, engaging young people of all backgrounds, including, as you say, the dominant culture, forces that conversation and allows those competencies to be built. So first with the students, and then because it's happening with the students, if the school can communicate well with families and parents, and make it a dinner table conversation or a car ride conversation or a come on in conversation and talk about it, which is sometimes hard for families, maybe there's something there. So again, you know, just that conversation happening. And then the other thing for me as a head of school, and in particular as a white male heterosexual head of school, I spend a lot of time writing about and speaking about this with my community. And quite frankly, my own understanding of white privilege, which actually took a long time to come to understand because I had grown up in communities that were predominantly of this dominant culture, and understanding that white supremacy wasn't just neo-Nazis and things like that it was a cultural phenomenon that simply pervade. When I had those I recognize my responsibility, is what I'm saying, as a school leader, and use the platform that I have to voice that within my community. And so again, finding a way to initiate the conversation.
I share this, and although it's a personal experience as a parent, I share it from the lens of an educator. So my son went to a very interesting school in New York City for kindergarten, and we were the first gentrifying white people who were going and attending that school, so that was an interesting kind of shift. And that school had been predominantly Puerto Rican. And the way in which the principal handled it was quite amazing. She recognized that in order for there to be a level of communication and contact, that the PTA was an opportunity. So she created a co-presidency and a co-vice presidency. And one person was a person who ended up being from the gentrifying group, who were predominantly white. And another co-leader was Puerto Rican. And there was such a powerful set of communications, problem solving, talking about attending different kinds of events, making sure that it wasn't representative of one person's idea of what a family dance party should look like, and instead it was a family dance party that was really representative of all. And it changed the culture of that school. And she did an amazing, beautiful job. And full disclosure, I was that one parent who was the white person on the PA, and it was so informative in my own learning. So when you think about communication and contact, rethinking how we identify power, and when you said the PTA group, that immediately went to maybe not all PTA is the way we think that they are or could be. So there could be some opportunity for growth or thinking about bias in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you guys have a comment? Yeah.
In response to how we get parents to think about the issues, I know all of us respond to data, and when we made changes in our school schedule focused on wellness, it was in response to data that we got from a survey that we had done. And I just was curious if you have had experience around the country with districts that have used surveys around inclusion and equity. I'm currently looking at one through Panorama Education, but it allows us to survey our kids and our parents and then disaggregate that data by ethnicity, race, age, etc., gender identity. So I was curious if you've had experience with that, because when people see the data from our own families and their sense of feeling welcome or not, it can be a wake-up call.
Right. I don't have any specifically from school districts, but we do a lot of that community-wide planning and community-based survey. So I'm thinking, like, I'm sure that would be applicable for families, but I don't know that I have one off the top of my head that I'm like, oh, this would be perfect for, second graders. But I'll do a little research and get back to you, because I think that is very true. I think one of the most powerful things that we can do as advocates or folks from the dominant culture is to give space for those stories and credence to those stories and listening to those experiences that folks have, and being able to use our own power and privilege to share those, not in a way that is demeaning, but in a way that really reflects the fact that our experience might be significantly different than other people's, especially within systems. One of the things I think that we use for data a fair amount within school districts and within communities when it comes to sort of calling out disproportionality is really about disproportionate minority contact and juvenile arrest rates. And so, for instance, in the community where I live, if you were a kid of color, you were 11 times more likely to be arrested. 11 times more likely. And it's not a super, super diverse place. And so really what that came down to is, like, if you were a kid of color in high school, then you probably got arrested twice. Like, that's really what that kind of number meant. And for our community, like, that was enough of a wake-up call in some ways to say, like, we got a lot of work to do here. But again, I think that what finding that data point for your specific community may look different than that particular data point, but there might be some of those kinds of data points too around educational attainment, for instance, or some of those things that you can really draw on, like, okay, wow, we have a 98% graduation rate, but if we look at kids from native Spanish-speaking families, that drops. I don't know what that is, but my guess is there's probably some discrepancy there that could be used to say, like, okay, we know that folks are experiencing this same educational system in a vastly different way, or the same community system in a vastly different way. Yeah. And thank you guys for using the mic. It's great for everyone in the room, but they're also using it to help record the session in case people want to hear. So,
okay, so all this is great stuff that we're doing, this and that. What do you do about staff that don't think they need this, or don't even see it and don't want to be part of it when it's coming from the top down?
Right.
So, what do you do?
Right. Do you guys want to have a conversation about requiring cultural competency trainings? Required, right? Right. That's what, and I think what we've seen is that on a community-wide basis, on an institutional basis, that's not, that doesn't work. I think there are some places where they have been able to incentivize folks to do some of this work in ways that don't feel mandated, but feel more like an opportunity for growth. And I think those tend to work a little bit better when things are phrased in like, we'd like to provide, 20 of our educators with this fellowship, for instance, or some of those kinds of incentivizing pieces, I think work a lot better. When I was doing much more like racial justice training, one of the first questions that I would ask people when they came into the room or when we started our training was, hey, so how many of you guys have ever been to a terrible diversity training? And everyone would raise their hand, and it was mostly because they felt like they were forced into that space. I also think that when we're talking about diversity and we're talking about issues of equity, one of the pieces, and I don't know that this directly answers your question, but I think sometimes if you are having conversations around identity and identity formation, that can be a really great entry point for folks. I used to do a 3-day racial justice training that I would co-facilitate with a facilitator of color, and sometimes we would spend the whole first day just trying to get white people to understand that they were white and that being white was a thing, right? And so I think part of it too is that, like, we live in like I was saying, like we were talking about before, this very polarized space where, like, we cannot keep expecting folks of color to be educating white people, but we also need to meet people where they are, and like who is the right person to do that? Where does that come from? I mean, these are the big questions, right? And I think there are lots, and there are organizations, racial justice organizations, equity organizations, diversity consultants who make a ton of money doing some of this work, but at its bottom, at its very bottom piece, there's values. There's a values expectation, right? And I think that could be another way in for educators. Like, we know you value the students in your classroom, right? Like, let's hope that we're working off of the same set of assumptions around the creation and the support and the the investment in creating little people that grow into big people that function in the world in a sufficient manner, and that means that we need to get on board with some of this stuff. And for some organizations, they're willing to make a line in the sand and say, you know what, if folks aren't going to be willing to have these conversations and do this work, then you know what, they can do something different. I don't think that educators can usually be in that space. But again, I think the creation of values, helping folks think about that in a positive way, and doing some incentivizing in a way that makes sense for your community is probably some of the best ways I've seen.
So Debbie, my thoughts on that are, I believe all educators want to do the right thing and care about kids. And so when we found that when we started off with training for all staff, which we still do, there was some buy-in, but there wasn't always there was an intellectual understanding, but not an emotional connection always to the work that was done until we made the shift to have our students tell their stories. And you see a palpable change when kids are talking directly to the adults in their lives about their experience, or we gave the case studies of some of the things that our students have experienced, or we did surveys that gave us insight into maybe students not feeling as engaged or as welcome, or the success stories, the things that teachers did that made them feel so valued and so welcome. And so appealing to the head and the heart has made a difference. The other thing is that while teachers all want to do the right thing, I think, for kids, this is tricky territory they're wading into. And they don't always have the skills to be able to navigate in some of these areas. And so we learned that we had to, we couldn't just talk about culturally responsive teaching. We had to actually give very specific examples of what it looked like. The other piece of this is that everyone is on a spectrum in their own understanding of some of these issues. And Ruha Benjamin, who's a professor here at Princeton University, talks about sort of racial literacy spectrum, where on one end it may be active discrimination, and on the other end you may be actively promoting social justice, but in between, we're all kind of moving in a direction, and how you move takes time. And so creating for change of any kind in any organization, you need a critical mass of people who are moving in that direction. And when you have that critical mass, they start to influence their colleagues, and they come along. And so that's why the equity teams at each school were so important. And so this is not instantaneous work. It takes a long time for the transformation to happen. But that's why we're staying with it. And it's not, you can't mandate this change, but you can continue to make sure that people are having the conversation and see the value, and are hearing from our kids, most importantly. Yeah.
I'm also a big believer in the tipping point theory of change, and that really says, you only need 3.5% of the population. 3.5% to change the culture of your institution. So I don't know what that looks like at your school, but in some schools that could be 7 teachers, or enough folks that have not quite critical mass, but maybe almost getting there.
Yeah, I thought it was closer to maybe 35%, but
right.
We'll get
I know
there.
it's I mean, I don't know about Malcolm Gladwell as a researcher, but I like the concept of that. Yeah, and those personal stories, as well as I think also helping folks really reflect on their own experiences around belonging, I think, can also be a pretty powerful.
The other thing I would say that, and my friend Tommy's heard me say this 1,000 times, and he likes to steal this quote from Marceline DeBose, who did our equity audit, and she would say, You know, Steve, you can't read your way out of racism. You can't workshop your way out of racism. You can only relationship your way out of racism. That doesn't mean that we don't read books that help us. It doesn't mean that we don't do workshops on cultural responsiveness, but it means that we have to be in relationship with people who give us diverse perspectives. And so we focus a lot on our hiring practices and giving teachers and educators the opportunity to be in relationship as we talk about these really important and difficult issues.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's and the one thing that I would add to that too, and the reason why, you know, I do still think it's important to read and it's important to go to training and it's important to, is one of the things that I think that I've seen is that we need to also prepare ourselves to be able to respond appropriately in those hard personal conversations, right? And sometimes those happen with colleagues, and those can be really challenging. And like you said, the relationship piece is so key there. And I don't know, you know, all of these conversations are always super nuanced. But I'm assuming that there are some times when all of us can think about a time that some kind of situation happened where someone was saying something or doing something that didn't sit within our values, or that we really found that was like racist or, you know, very, very ethnocentric or xenophobic, and that we personally didn't necessarily felt like we had the tool. We knew it was wrong and we knew it was upsetting to us, but we didn't know exactly how to confront that in a space. And so I think there are a couple of, you know, interesting models of doing that work too. And I think, you know, they don't have to be the conversations we're carrying around in the back of our brain about how we could have done it better. I don't know if anybody has an example of how they have or not handled that, if they want to share, but I think it can be a tough place to sit. I think thinking about where we are. Oh, so you know, the final component here, and we talked about staff engagement and student engagement, and family engagement. The other thing I think that we can talk a little bit about in this space around you know, operationalizing welcoming for our schools is really talking about how the broader community can come and support and connect with all of our families, really, in a school setting. And I think that's a space that we talked a little bit about before, and probably a space where you know, you all in human services and Melissa have some great examples too of where you're able to have social workers come to the schools, or have other volunteers doing work, or having places and spaces like health fairs and job fairs and other kinds of community engagement activities that happen inside schools, just so, again, that families and other folks that live in their neighborhoods or whatever can get familiar with that. I think a little bit about this in terms of, we talk a lot about this in terms of college and college readiness or whatever, you know, like I assume that there are kids that live in this community that have never been on campus, right? Was that a fair assumption? And I think that happens in every town where there's a large university. And I think the same could be said for engagement in schools and engagement. Like, there may be a really cool space in your school, in your community, in your neighborhood that there's never been a chance for you to experience, or for you to bring your preschool age children too, or all of those kinds of pieces. So I think there's some, you know, some opportunity there as well as sort of like, you know, yeah, neighbor to neighbor days, and yeah.
So we have all these immigrant families who speak a different language.
Mm-hmm.
And we have many of these immigrant families whose both parents are working 2 or 3 jobs, or 2 jobs. How do we engage them? How do we find them? How do we? Where's the language gap is pretty big,
Mm-hmm.
and they are so busy worrying about bringing money in. They are so busy worrying about their families that they have little time to think about, I wonder why I'm not fully incorporated into this community. Any thoughts on that?
I know it doesn't always work with everyone's schedule, but I have seen, you know, children's soccer programs on Saturday morning working pretty well to engage a broad number of folks. I've also seen it. I don't know what this looks like particularly here, but in some of the communities where I work, there's a particular like park or recreational venue that that families do congregate in when they have time to be together, and that really taking the proactive approach and going there can be a one solution. I mean, I think, you know, people, you're right, are extremely busy, and figuring out how to communicate with folks is also a hard one there. I think other folks have a couple of answers on all of them.
Such a good question, Ross. I feel like that's the essential question. But what about like a phone number that people could text, you know, and get information?
There's probably many solutions to this, and there's
Right.
no one solution.
Right. Yeah. Right. Like I think one of the things I think that really will come out of this is like there's probably some great examples, but it's going to take a combination of things. Like you cannot rely on just one avenue.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that worked, because I do have a lot of parents who like work 2 or 3 jobs, and then even to have them come in just to talk about their child's grade or something like that, I have to like maneuver, you know, like their schedules and stuff. So I figured out like giving them, like for an event, like even a month's notice, having it on, a lot of my parents work with, what is not FaceTime, not Snapchat, WhatsApp. So I do like, I literally have like 20 phone numbers together, and I'm like, these are the 3 dates, who can come at what time. If you cannot come, can you send a family member to attend for this? The child's really excited, sort of thing. And it's like, it takes more steps, especially, and I can understand for a lot of teachers because they're very busy doing a lot of other things. So I'm just speaking on myself, but it takes a whole bunch of little steps. But eventually, if you create like a nice little system, parents will respond, or they'll send someone, family member that can participate, which is like cool, you know.
So that's a professional relationship. Yeah. When you're talking about a community engagement, I can't talk to that Spanish person. You know, I just can't engage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so we can't get to know each other.
Right.
And that goes on over and over.
So recently I did a school trip. For the first time, about like 14 of my kids went to the library ever in my city, where first time they ever walked into it. And then we went into sort of like an art walk community. And yeah, a lot of the people that were working in some of the facilities did not speak Spanish. But I reached out ahead of time and asked community leaders, community activists, other organizations, hey, can you volunteer like an hour of your time and come translate for me for these kids? So it's a matter of like, you know, putting them on the spot. You're a community leader, you're a community activist, you are part of this organization. You got like 20 minutes to come and share, like translate or participate in this as a community member.
It's not always about the parents or their families being flexible. It's also about the teachers themselves being flexible, which I've witnessed a lot of the teachers at John Witherspoon Middle School have been flexible, working with the parents and their schedules. And like was mentioned, also allowing for other family members to come to represent the parent. And I feel like it's made an impact, and I feel like it's helping in the schools. And it's not only about texting, it's also about making that phone call. A lot of times the parents appreciate listening to someone on the other end, and not only making that phone call, but also following up and reminding them. And they appreciate it because like it was mentioned, they are busy all the time working, maybe going to school. So they can easily forget. So just reminding them, sending out that reminder, or if you have the time, call them and remind them, and they appreciate it.
Okay, I can speak from experience now being here with Princeton Public Schools at Johnson Park School. An example, Dr. Ginsburg, the principal there at Johnson Park, has done an amazing job with delegating a parent liaison, a community outreach sort of coordinator. There is a woman that does a tremendous job in reaching out to the Spanish-speaking families. For instance, we just had an event where transportation was needed. So this person was contacted and families came to this school event at JP. Throughout the whole school year, you know, there's tremendous effort made in placing those phone calls to those working families that have 2 or 3 jobs. It works. You know, it takes a village. I have 3 young children under the age of 10. You know, it doesn't happen overnight, and making those types of relations prosper. And as we all are working parents, I'm assuming, in this room, so are our immigrant parents, those newcomer families that are here in the Princeton area. A lot of my level 1 newcomer students in the ESL program at Johnson Park are parents themselves learning the English language. And they may be at the university level, you know, as scholar students themselves learning, but they will make the effort to come to the school events and be available when they can. But it does require for someone or a team of people to advocate and to reach out. It does work. So I've seen it happen at Johnson Park, and I can only speak from my own experience.
Yeah, I think you guys have really touched on a lot of sort of the core values of this piece too, that, you know, there's, for our newcomer families, many of them may not also really understand the value that we place as educators and as a community on that parental engagement, right? There's a whole other set of cultural pieces that could be happening there, because in many other countries, like, folks are really not supposed to be questioning their teachers or, you know, doing all of those kinds of things. So I think one of the things is really just introducing folks to the amount of engagement that we expect in the U.S. around parental involvement in education and other spaces. I mean, I know teachers that knock on doors all the time. They're going to people's houses, they're doing all of those kinds of things, and they're really, you know, making the commitment to connect with families at, you know, 8 o'clock in the morning if they work second shift, or all of those other pieces. I think, you know, one of the things that I think might be the best way for us to sort of spend the next, you know, I don't know, 20 minutes or so together would be to really, like, I think that there is a ton of programmatic work happening, and I think that there is a ton of energy around this. but it also sounds like there might be an opportunity here to really think broadly about how we can support kids across all the different sorts of schools that we have in our systems, and between the private and public spaces. And one of the ways that I think communities have sort of taken that on is really by thinking about what a welcoming schools plan might look like. And I don't think we're gonna like jump into that particularly today, but I would challenge you guys to say that like if there is, you know, some interest in continuing this kind of discussion and helping share the information and the programmatic approaches that you all have here, I think that could be a really useful way to spend, you know, 10 or so minutes talking about what that might look like. You know, we know that for instance, when we're talking about community-wide plans and we create these multi-sector and multiracial opportunities for folks to really think about collective action and collective impact, that we can move forward really quickly. You know, but again, I don't necessarily know what that looks like when you're talking about a public school system, when you're talking about several charter schools, when you're talking about private schools that are part of larger networks. But that you all are really in a space where you're serving a population of kids here in this community or right outside this community. So I think this could be a really interesting thing for you all to think about. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that or not.
Thank you. Of course, in this concept of welcoming, we've been using the third person often too, in referring to certain populations. And at the same time, and maybe I'm thinking of the dominant culture question earlier, correct me if I'm wrong, but in a very short period of time, what we're currently considering the dominant culture in our country, it will no longer be that. And so I would just, in my own learning today, in my own mind expansion, it's welcoming is not a one-way thing. That I am welcoming somebody else. I'm just conscious of the direction in which our country, and you showed earlier, Molly, this morning I was in your presentation.
The demographic.
Yeah, the 21% in the state of New Jersey. Right. And so up over the course of 20 years, up almost doubling or tripling from what it was. And so I just am mindful of that, the actual demographics of our country. And then just this other piece that I just thought of in terms of the previous question, building community. I'm so conscious of my families who come to this country and work so hard to learn the English language. I would encourage the people in this room to learn Spanish. I did and met my wife, and thank God, because she's Guatemalan, and that was fortuitous. But I'm now trying to learn Chinese, which is my new growing population as well. That's taking a lot more time for me. But having the ability to speak somebody else's language, knowing that others are trying to learn my native language, I think also holds a lot of weight, and it's doable. So, just two thoughts.
I firmly agree, although learning new languages as an adult is really, really hard. Right. Right. I think, yeah. Much of this work, when we are talking about this, yeah, in sort of this very like cerebral and like theoretical manner of like, oh, you know, how do we support this and how do we support that? what we obviously don't want to lose sight of is like the work that folks are doing every day, because ultimately the goal is for everyone, newcomer families and long-term residents, to really feel like they belong, right? And we do that through personal interaction. I once had a job where we were talking about how to measure success in this particular position. And I think for educators and many of us that do community-based work, this is the thing. And I said to my boss, you know, how do we measure success? And he looked at me straight in the eyes and he said, I measure success through transformational experiences. And I was like, oh shit, here we go, right? But really that's what we're talking about. And you're right. We have all of these, like I have a toolkit that we provide, right? The Welcoming Schools Toolkit, and in it is sort of a bunch of curricular activities around like Venn diagrams and discussions and all of these kinds of things, and the full stop goal of those is to create a transformational experience between two students, right? And that's the piece here. Or to create a transformational experience between two family members. Or despite your language barrier or difference, you might just be able to sit down and have a meal with someone and have it be perfectly enjoyable for both of you, right? And like not be scared to sort of take on that opportunity. Because, like we communicate with people nonverbally all the time. So I think again, what that is really at the crux of what we're talking about, and it does sort of end up in this kind of theoretical systemic space, and how do we both challenge the systems that make it more difficult for us to find ourselves in spaces for transformational relationships, and how do we take advantage of those times when they appear to us. Yeah. Right.
Our commitment to what we do and making our lives and our country better or whatever, that it's on each one of us to do that, right? Reach out to the mom, the Chinese mom who is really shaky about her English, and just sit there and wait till you understand what she's saying, right? And she'll give you a hug at the end.
Right.
And that little thing is a transformational experience for everybody. Yeah.
Right. Or even if you don't speak the language, we can figure out how to meet at the park and we can watch our kids play.
Right.
Like these are the things.
Right. And I do think too that when you do that with the kids around, they're watching. They're watching everything that you do. And so that welcomes them as well. They feel comfortable. We're trying to make that connection. And they're much better at it, really, in so many ways, the kids are. But that's what resonates for me.
Just listening to this discussion about language and thinking in my own mind that actually language is the big deal about this whole thing. So maybe schools should be having a lot of PD that involves learning language. I mean, we have a huge diverse population at our school, but it never even occurred to me. Well, I mean, obviously I talk to the kids and say, tell me the word for thank you or whatever in your language, but it doesn't get very far beyond that. And I would love to have the luxury of spending time learning some Chinese and Spanish in my school. So that's an idea for us, Rick. And just on that note, my father was an immigrant from Spain. And I always found it fascinating because I didn't even know when I was a child until he was in his 50s that he spoke Spanish. And I later found out he got a job because he spoke Spanish, so that's how I found out. But I came to understand that he didn't want anybody to know when he was an immigrant, and he got rid of his Spanish accent as quickly as possible. So that's another piece of this, is children that don't want to be pulled out as different from the dominant culture.
Yeah, I think we know that there are these whole sort of lost generations of folks and lost generations of culture and racial literacy and language, especially from when we're thinking about folks who come from Germany, Italy, Greece.
I'm wondering if you have any examples from around the country where communities, or more specifically schools, have done work around shifting their culture as opposed to working on assimilation.
You know, I love Minnesota, folks. So one of the places that that I've seen really work on this, despite some national news that you may have seen, is the town of Worthington, Minnesota. And they are a town that it was primarily agricultural, then a couple of really big meatpacking plants opened up, and so they had a pretty big influx of folks in their community. And the first wave of that happened about 30 years ago. And that was mostly Spanish-speaking families at that particular time. And so, they really went through a really interesting sort of embrace of the Hispanic and Latinx community and culture there, and had really sort of found their groove, if you will. And then through some of the newer policies that we're seeing now around, basically folks not being able to come across the southern border, the large meatpacking plants in that town started recruiting a lot of folks from West Africa and other communities, and that was really sort of a shock to the community. And so one of the things that the school administrators there and the community really had to do was really think about how they approach some of the religious and cultural differences in their town. And the employers actually were the ones who really stepped up their game, and they really started doing a lot of language and cultural trainings within the plants, and that really also started happening in the schools, and they really were able to sort of shift their culture to be much more accepting, especially of practicing Muslims in their community. I'm trying to think if there are other really interesting ones that are, sort of a little bit outside the box, but I don't know if that specifically answers your question about like if there was a place where communities really had something, happen, for instance, where like there was a particular like flashpoint. And they really had to do something about that. I know that there are lots of schools that are dealing with lots of hate and bias in a lot of different ways. That might be a space to look at. Let me think about that one a little bit more, I guess. Yes, we got two more questions.
Well, so today's really interesting. I mean, creating a welcoming community, welcoming school is the right goal. And it's clear, like from our conversations today, that and we didn't have to have the conversation, that there are a lot of challenges.
Right.
There are lots of reasons to say why this is really difficult. There's a whole bunch of people we didn't talk about who aren't here because they're working in New York and they're busy with their own lives and they're just really not particularly focused in on this. But what I've heard here today is a lot of good processes that are in place, a lot of good events that are happening all over our community and elsewhere in the country, but all over the community that are picking away at the issue of welcoming, understanding other cultures, making an effort to understand other cultures, to teach about other cultures. And so what my takeaway is that this is a tremendous base foundation to use and to build upon. And also, it's clear, you know, we sit over here, we don't know what they do over at St. Paul's or other schools, charter schools and private schools and public schools, and we don't know what other corners of our community are doing that are engaging. And I think that figuring out a way, I mean, you suggest, figuring out a way to engage, to find a process, to develop something that grows over time. We have a good start, and we have a lot more to go, but I think that we've heard a lot of good ideas and, you know, committed people to this process.
Got another commissioner.
One way to start is doing just what we're doing right now. I've been doing diversity and inclusion work for a long, long time before it was under different names. But I'm just saying the key has always kind of been having these dialogues and folks beginning to understand the commonality of their diversity. All right? And that's where you start that conversation. Just like the example that you pointed to earlier, Ross, where, for instance, folks that are working several jobs. Our responsibility is to continue to make them feel welcome and understand the circumstances they may be in. Don't just assume that they're not interested in their child's well-being, because they're actually out trying to take care of a family and live like that. But we can still send that information out continuously, you know, make them feel welcome. In one of the panels that we did some years back, we talked to a group of students, and empowering them to be able to navigate beyond the obvious boundaries. You got educators, and then our job is to be the students. And one of the students said something that was very interesting, said, left to our own devices as students, we'll get along just fine. We'll figure it out. We're expected to kind of be under the mandate of the adult in the room, when the adults won't be vulnerable enough to admit that they're still trying to figure it out too. You know, so, you know, just keep on talking and take action.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just want to say, you know, thank you to all of you guys for hanging in till the very last minute today. I would love it. We'd love it if you would mind filling out an evaluation for this particular training as well. And then, I don't know, Melissa, I think, you probably have everyone's email in here. And I don't know if you all, it seems like you might feel comfortable at this stage of the game saying, hey, let's exchange some emails. Maybe this is a topic that, you know, the Human Rights Commission, Civil Rights Commission, or, you know, or the Human Services Commission could say, hey, we'd really like to continue to create some space to share and have dialogue around this. It could also be a really great welcoming week activity to continue this kind of discussion throughout the piece. So yeah, once again, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for all of the work that you do. Thank you for your commitment to kids and to communities. And I feel like I gained a wealth of information about the amazing policies and programs that you all are working on. While you're filling out your things, I'm just going to leave. You don't have to stay, but it's only 2 minutes. I will just share with you I just want to show you a little video while you're filling out your.
The Welcome Walk is a time for Sumner students and staff.
Uh-oh.
Is Welcome Week in the city of Austin, and Sumner students take part in Welcoming Week by doing this walk outside. So students hold flags from different countries to represent countries that they have lived in and come from, or countries where their families are still at. And students who are native to the United States get a chance to see the diversity of where their peers and their friends have lived prior to living in Austin, Minnesota. The Welcome Walk is important because it gives a visual representation of the cultural diversity within our schools. The students who participate in this Welcome Walk take pride in creating the flag from their country and holding it while they are walking and showing for all the onlookers to see. It is something that they can celebrate that is a part of them and only them, and it is something that other members of the community get to watch as these students walk tall and proud, displaying their native country. And it is a lot of fun, and cars honk and people wave and the kids feel very special and important for that time during the day.
Just some cute smiling kids to finish off your day. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. Oh, sure. Yeah. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. It was really nice to meet you. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's really awesome. It was like, well, and what I thought was so interesting too is like that combination of like charter schools and like public. Yeah, I love it. Love it.